All right. Good morning, afternoon, to everyone joining us live today. And also welcome Fel, Reshma, and Jonathan in this panel. I know that we're already 3 minutes late. So what I suggest is that we dive straight in because we have many questions that people want to address together with you. And we only have 60 minutes, and that's always a challenge. So maybe before jumping straight into the topic of today, and Jonathan will give a brief presentation about what we have been talking or what we will talk about today. What would be extremely helpful if you can all briefly introduce yourself to the audience, but also mention the organizations that you work for, what you do. And maybe to ease things out, Jonathan, can you start from the Awell side?
Yeah, glad to. Thanks for having me on the panel. It's exciting to do a presentation like this. So head of engineering at Awell. I have had a couple of different careers. I used to do this sort of thing a lot as an investor, but not in healthcare. So I'm excited to be presenting on this side. And yeah, glad to be here.
Great to have you as well. Maybe Fel, you can go next.
Sure. Hi, I'm Felicity, also known as Fel. I'm co-founder and CEO of TIA. TIA is an innovative women's healthcare solution that combines primary care, gynecology, mental health, and wellness services to build a more integrative and longitudinal solution for women. We've been operating in the healthcare services field for 5 years and have many battle wounds to speak of, which I'm sure some of them will come up in this conversation.
That's indeed the goal. Reshma, can you also introduce yourself?
Sure thing, Rick. So hi, everyone. I'm Reshma, co-founder and CEO of Medplum. We make an API-first electronic health record that is open source. It's kind of like a tagline. It's actually a developer platform for making healthcare apps is the way to think about it. And I have, similar to JB, previous life doing investing at YC, and then previously starting other healthcare companies and working in big tech, Facebook, Microsoft, and whatnot. So happy to share kind of our thought process as well as we go through. But thanks for having me.
Awesome. And yeah, I'm Rick. I'm a nurse by training. I lead clinical strategy here at Awell. And what we are building is something that sits nicely together with Medplum. So we have a no-code engine that allows the ops and the clinical team to design complex clinical workflows, and then they click on publish, and then the engineers can use also our API first architecture to then integrate that into Medplum or their patient application or anything else that they are using from a text perspective. So before jumping into the questions, because again, we have many, maybe Jonathan, can you briefly give a presentation to the audience of why we are here today and the article that you've written that essentially led to this conversation?
Yeah, glad to. And you'll see I spent a lot of time on this presentation. But it's fun working with CareOps and Awell has been just incredibly enlightening for me personally, because with CareOps you get to hear a lot of theory and understand how other companies organizations are tackling some of the same problems. And then at Awell, where we get to kind of go in depth with our customers and essentially solutions engineer, we get to sort of put some of that to practice. So let me not probably sharing the wrong. There we go. All right. Hopefully y'all can see a nice blank screen. So in any case, some of these learnings we wanted to put down into a series of writings, and there was a blog a couple months ago, just recently put out, and the message was essentially pull your clinicians out of the EHR. This is, I think, sage advice for maybe 3 or 4 different reasons. One of them is related to burnout. And, you have, the clinician burnout, which we hear about. And, it's more than just pajama time, I would say. It is also related to the idea that an EHR and a clinician are looking to do two different things. And so over time, there's a friction between the person using the EHR and the purpose of the EHR. And that over time can also lead to burnout. And one of the reasons you have this sort of friction is because now, maybe reason number two here would be the complexity of care today has changed quite a bit, or continues to evolve. And it's not just a patient and a physician, right? This is usually a patient interacting with a care team. And it is, in almost all cases, there's many more than one person on the provider's side, right? And patients themselves are looking for, I would say, more personalization, and they're consumers. And I would say this is maybe reason number three is you have patients that are really consumers today, and they're used to personalization, for example, in other areas of their life. And why shouldn't they also have that personalization when it comes, excuse me, to their health? Fourth and final point, it is really the pace of change in healthcare. It wasn't very long ago when there were care organizations that said, okay, everybody, it's time for us to build a telehealth platform. We've got 4 weeks. How do we do it? And, we don't know what the next Black Swan event is going to be necessarily, but we do know that an organization that is used to iterating quickly is going to be maybe better served, for if one of those events comes. But this, I took this. I had my annual wellness visit coincidentally yesterday, and this was pinned up at the in the doctor's office. And it's a pain scale, but you could also relate it to maybe the number of tabs that are open, in order to understand what's going on in a patient journey. So I thought that was cute that it went to 11 and beyond. So how do we solve a problem like this? And I think the answer is to build a layer on top of the EHR. You'll probably hear the words composability and API first a lot over the next 50 minutes. The EHR, excuse me, the EHR, just as an example, the EHR is usually, one doctor, one patient, one note, one encounter, one bill, right? That's the sort of atomic unit, if you could think about, an interaction in the EHR. And care a lot of times doesn't look like that. You want to understand what's the timeline for the patient, what's going on there. And so that layer on top is for the providers. And so you can leverage the EHR, you can leverage a care orchestration platform like Awell. You can leverage a CRM or a patient engagement platform. A lot of times we're doing a lot of this work actually related to task management and project management. So having some sort of task management as another piece is important. And then I'd be remiss, I think, if I didn't talk about the importance of metrics and data. Final slide.
Maybe Jonathan, before you go to the final slide, can you go back here briefly? So obviously, Felicity, the reason that we invited you to be on that panel, and the same is true for Reshma as well, is because you follow a same philosophy when it comes to designing or redesigning TIA's tech stack. So can you maybe briefly explain to the audience what you are building or how you're trying to implement this philosophy at TIA today, and how that evolved over time, because you've obviously been around for a long time?
Yeah, sure, of course. So I think when we first started delivering care, we knew that we wanted to create what Jonathan is talking about, which is a provider forward technology experience. I think, the advent of care ops is just like music to my ears, because when we first started, it was actually a really challenging conversation to have with a lot of people, to describe that technology is actually underpinning the operational workflows. The technology is designating the operations. And therefore, if you want to have differentiated operations, if you want to build a new care model, which is what TIA is all about, you need to think about how the technology is going to essentially be that kind of fertilizer before you actually design the operational workflows. And so with that insight in mind, we said, okay, this clear understanding that happy providers make happy patients. How do we make happy providers? How do we build a technology stack that will infuse the workflows that will make them happier? So that's always been our kind of orientation. We started out before CareOps existed, before Awell existed, before Medplum existed. So what we were trying to do is patch together solutions that were available on the market and also build a lot of our own homegrown solutions. And so what we did was we started out basically finagling Dr. Chrono, which was the only EHR at the time that had an open source, basically an API we could code into that wasn't zillions of dollars, i.e. Epic. And so we started there and realized that, okay, we could use some of the services that Dr. Chrono had, but we also wanted to layer in these other services. We needed to build some ourselves. We wanted to build our own interface, so our own UI layer, so we could really control the way that the provider interacted with the technology. And so that's where we started. And I'll just pause there because I think that's probably a good answer to your question to begin with, at least.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's I think that definitely sets the stage. And then Reshma, obviously Medplum also has a strong opinion about this API first composable architecture. So can you maybe explain to the audience what your philosophy is behind what you're building with Medplum, and then, for example, how organizations like, for example, Summer Health or Ro are leveraging Medplum to get to that vision that Fel and Jonathan just talked about?
Well, I think first thing I'll say about Medplum is that we are open source, and this is for a specific reason. I'll chat it here in case anybody wants to star or bookmark. But the key superpower of open source is composability. If you need to, multiplex everything. So in healthcare, it's like crazy. Like you have to, pull the formulary from the payer based on the patient's coverage. You don't want to send them a medication that won't be covered by their insurance. Then you got to pick the lab that's in their region and covered by their insurance. Then you have to send to the revenue cycle, and you have to coordinate with their provider if they're in office 1 and a different provider if they're in office 2. In a workflow like that, could touch 15 systems, easy. And as a longtime practitioner of developing healthcare apps, my first startup was a teleradiology PACS, where picture archiving communication system, where we had to connect 500 hospitals, right, on the same technical infrastructure. Similar problem. You, as a developer of these systems, you're just stuck. You have to call sales and then go through a huge sales process to figure out how to connect one small little, this is nuts. And this is the origin of Medplum. And we really think about this super rigorously. We're proud to work with the team at TIA, Summer Health and others who have these complex needs, and no detail too small. What's the formulary? How do you get the price? How do you show only this under this context? How do you warn in this case? No detail too small. I think that's what we really focus on. And we have all of these kind of workflows that we really want to be able to provide, like Fel was mentioning, a super high fidelity experience that reduces pajama time, happy clinicians, happy patients.
And so you would argue that the main reason to pick an EHR like Medplum is really the flexibility angle, or would you say that there are other benefits that are maybe more hidden that also come with adopting something like Medplum, or just something that is API first and headless and composable?
One thing that's interesting about Medplum, though we, use the fact that we are a certified EHR, et cetera, as a communication device, actually, a lot of our customers already have an EHR, and they're running Medplum on the side. What they're trying to build is those workflows that are super high fidelity and highly automated, and they're encompassing, CRM components, patient-facing components, interop components to compose a solution with a custom care model that works end to end. So I guess to answer your question, the need is really driven by the requirements of the service line. And that's how we think about it versus like, which EHR can I buy and which service can I offer based off that EHR? So we have the opposite mode. What service goals do you have? How can we accommodate that?
Yeah, that makes sense. And then obviously, Jonathan, in your article, you also talk about like Astrana, Oak Street, Carbon, they all move towards or are moving towards more composability. So from your perspective, let's say that, so from an engineering perspective, I think it's quite clear to me why composable is the future. But can you, let's say we have a lot of clinicians here, we have a lot of ops managers here as well. Like, why can you explain to them why it's important for them personally? Like, why should you have composability? Like, should I care as a clinician or not?
Yeah, it's a great question. I thought a little bit about, defining the word composable as I was preparing for this, and the best thing I could come up with earlier this morning was I would say composability would be Lego blocks and inheritance. We always say in engineering composability over inheritance. And inheritance, I think, is like a Mr. and Mrs. Potato Head, and not every patient or experience is a potato. And so that's at a very high level. I think that's the way you think about composability. And if I were, you follow these heuristics, knowing that there are problems that you can't see, 2 years ahead, is very hard to predict the future. And so knowing that, you want to just think, okay, what is going to make it easier for me to change? Because I don't know the future. I can't predict, everything that our system is going to need in the next 6 to 12 months today. So how do I set up for, success in the future? And composability, I think, is the best sort of heuristic to follow there.
I'd just layer in an additional thought for clinicians and kind of care team members more broadly. I think what this idea means, the composability idea, means that there can be more adaptability in the way that you deliver care. And that can come to market, i.e. it can come to you as a care delivery individual much more quickly. And it means that you can actually test things and you can be involved in the testing of that delivery, which is a really different cultural orientation than most clinicians have ever worked in. And for TIA, one thing that has been interesting is even the idea that we can build our own operational workflows because we control our technology stack is different for a clinician to work in. And then to layer on top this idea that, okay, let's try this, let's roll it out for a month and see how you like it, completely blows their minds. And I think that's a really powerful thing, but also a massive cultural shift in the care delivery segment of this overall healthcare ecosystem.
And so, Fel, you obviously came from a tech stack that was much less composable. So can you maybe paint a picture to the people that are in the room today? Like, what did it look like before and what it does then look like today with what you're building towards?
Sure. So I think, as I mentioned, we started out by using Dr. Chrono, and that was kind of our initial foray into trying to build something composable. Today, we are plucking features out of Dr. Chrono and moving on to Medplum one by one. So kind of what Reshma described earlier, we're running Medplum on the side of what we're doing with Chrono, more as like kind of a transition phase. But ultimately, what this means is that we'll have a lot more control over the third-party resources that we're using for very specific services. For example, prescriptions, faxes, referrals, all of these types of key workflows that we do in addition to basic documentation, collecting patient information, submitting things to our billing provider, et cetera. So breaking all of these services apart affords us this really amazing opportunity to go out there in the ecosystem and say, who's the best service provider for this thing? One of the most astounding things about working on Dr. Chrono has been the amount of downtime that they have allowed in the product. And so I think for us, what we're really excited about is by breaking apart the different services that we use, we can actually go find the best billing provider, find the best fax provider, find the best of any of the services that we want to use, and then integrate with those services in a verticalized way. So ultimately, this will improve the way that we're able to deliver care and also deliver an ecosystem for our providers.
I mean, the TIA case is very, representative and advanced in many ways, because you also have a geographic spread. A lot of EHRs have a strong sense of place. They assume everything's happening at a single location. So you kind of have to, do a special workflows to coordinate and compose, like you mentioned, the different solutions based off different scenarios.
And so, Reshma, maybe a follow-up question for you. So it's one from the audience. There is a lot of like thought in healthcare or skepticism about the fact that maybe open source models are good for an MVP, but are not scalable. Obviously, you have other thoughts about that. So can you maybe quickly address that concern whenever people bring that up?
Totally. I actually think that it's maybe the opposite. Open source is less good for MVP, but at scale, it is very effective for a few reasons. One, first of all, you can build out a lot of your solution and really pressure test the scenarios you care most about even before you sign up for anything. That is actually, one of the big issues with platforms is you buy it and then you realize that it doesn't work the way you want. So that's very effective for scale. Two is that it's, the composability allows you to swap out the different parts as they get ineffective for your workflow. So if you have, for example, a small lab that can't deal with your scale, you could add a new lab partner and as you expand. So that's a very future-proof thing as well. And the third is the vendor neutrality. I think, one of the proffers that we make to our customers as Medplum is that, you do have this sovereignty. We have to earn your business every time you make a level up. So because we have the open source, that is always your alternative. So that's part of it too. To answer your question directly on the head, I mean, we have customers with millions of patients and 50-state rollout. So it's we actually skew towards the bigger size.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I obviously, from a low code perspective, because Awell is a low code system, there is also a lot of skepticism. And how we address that from our perspective is the buy and build part that Fel also talked about. So with Awell, you can obviously drag and drop stuff into a canvas and then design something, but you can also easily, as an engineer, build on top of what we already or what we don't have. So for example, you want to integrate with your homegrown system, you can use our composable architecture to build something that is homegrown or that is deeply integrated with your systems as well. So to the question there, Harriet, I really think that buying solutions where you can allow the buy and build, and that's again the entire philosophy behind composable, make sure that you don't have the lock-in effect, but yet you also can scale and scale quickly as well, and also adapt on, for example, Black Swan events that Jonathan also mentioned. I'm not sure, Jonathan, from an engineering perspective, any thoughts on the low code part that I didn't address here?
No, but I did want to, if it's all right, tack on to the conversation about composability. And, TIA is such a good example of this. So how many times have you gone through an EHR, switching out an EHR, and like what type of event is that, and how nerve-wracking is that for everybody involved? And there are a few reasons something like that is nerve-wracking, but one of them is related to like the full rip and replace, where you're going to turn something off one day and turn it on the next day. And the ability to have that layer like TIA has on top of the EHR, right? The application that the providers use. This allows them to iterate and work, slowly ripping out one component at a time, testing it. And so this is such a great example of the value of composability and the work that was done. I don't know how many years ago on the tech side, fell at TIA, but now this is you're reaping the rewards of it today, and that's such a great example, and I'm sure there are many others from other organizations in the audience too.
Maybe I think rip and replace is going to go the way of the dinosaur. I mean, I was working with a customer and they showed me a budget that for their rip and replace, which had a line item for like the downtime and staff confusion that then missed revenue due to that, and
wow.
it was the major reason why they couldn't go that direction, actually. So, that progressive upgrade, I actually think that everyone should have a sovereign strategy for their electronic health data, the records data that is independent of a specific EHR platform.
Mm-hmm.
And we talk a lot about the fact that with composable architecture comes flexibility to experiment. Fel, you also mentioned that. Can you because to us it's probably obvious that experimentation and iteration is good for the business from an outcomes perspective, but also from a clinical efficiency perspective, and also from a learnings perspective. But I don't think it's that obvious for other people that are not used to that continuous improvement mindset. Because when I was a clinician, or a nurse before I joined Awell, when I was questioning protocols, I always got the message we have been doing this for 20 years, stop asking those questions and just do it as we've been doing it since forever. So what are some, can you give maybe one or two very practical examples of what continuous improvement brought to TI as an organization from an impact perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think the most obvious examples lie in the fundamental desire for everyone, which is to reduce the number of clicks. And the question being, how do you do that? And I think one thing that we're really proud of at TIA is we've actually created a subgroup of clinicians that we call our tech testers. They basically take on early rollouts for anything that's developed and try it and see, how does it feel? How many clicks does it take? Did the design actually work successfully for us in both the workflow and how does it feel for collaborators? I think that's one of the, hidden ghosts in a lot of these design systems is that you often think about the person doing the action, and then there's always 4 or 5 other people who have to inherit the action. How does that work for them? And so I think those are the areas that we've seen the best examples of actually rolling something out, testing it, and then iterating on it. So it's really, again, coming back to this idea that with this kind of composable architecture, you're able to really think about how am I building a workflow, and how am I not only building that from an infrastructure perspective so it works, in terms of delivering the data, but it also works for the user, the end user, and how can I continuously improve the way that they're engaging with the technology that again defines their day-to-day. And so I think it's really interesting that you were bringing up this piece around the protocols and how in medicine often it's we've been doing this protocol for this way for 20 years. And that does get to something that has been important for us, which is differentiating clinical workflows from operational workflows and giving people a sense of, okay, there's one place that we don't experiment and there's one place that we do experiment, and that has also opened up a little bit more of the digestibility for our care teams, both on the operations side and the clinical side, for using some of these different features for testing and rollouts.
And so, Jonathan, in your article, to piggyback on that, you also mentioned iteration speed is a competitive advantage. And I think you gave the example of one of our customers where we iterated on a care flow multiple times over a very short time period. And again, for a clinician perspective, this is scary because I don't want to see change that often because I'm already burned out from so many angles. So what are some benefits that you've seen doing that from an engineering perspective, but then also implementing it in clinical practice with our customers as well?
Yeah, well, I unwittingly gave the Tia example earlier, right? That's such a great poster child example of iteration speed and composability and sort of how they're interlinked. I would also encourage for those of you watching who have not already seen the Iora Health or the Oak Street Health CareOps videos to go and pull them up and watch them. You can even watch them at 1.5 speed if you're, pressed on time. But they both give some really good examples. Gave good examples not only in how they iterated on clinical workflow side, but also just internal processes and the value that you get from getting metrics, gathering metrics about your clinicians and how they're working inside of your system. So just two really, really good sources for me as well. And I would encourage you to watch those. An example, you mentioned the Awell customer who, we're iterating very, very quickly. And, I'll give another example, same customer. We're able to, so there's a task management piece of the platform, and they are just bringing in task management into the provider-facing application. And on their roadmap was, okay, we're going to build out task A, and then we're going to build out task B, and then, these different kinds of, enrollment task or, making a certain call to the patient to follow up on something. And all of these are engineering effort. All of these are going to take time. And so you look at a roadmap and you say, okay, we have a task management platform, but it's only going to be 30% complete after, a month and a half or 2 months. And here's where sort of the power of composability comes into play. So instead, they swapped out the Awell care orchestration. I'm selling Awell a little bit here, but this is honestly, this is useful everywhere. So hopefully you'll bear with me. So they swapped out the Awell care orchestration for the actual, the body of the task. And now they have the ability to iterate and build as many tasks as they want. They built the chassis once, and they have the ability to build as many different kinds of tasks as they want. And now they can iterate on those tasks, and the clinicians are none the wiser for it. So you talk about maybe the nerves that could come with iterating quickly. Well, if as a clinician, all I see is what's next for me to do, then I don't necessarily have to keep the whole clinical pathway in my head. All I need to know is, this is where they're at in the patient journey. Here's the timeline, and here's what's next for me to do. So I think that's a pretty good example of, iterating quickly and reducing the roadmap as a result.
One thing that sounds like it's related is that if you're doing a lot of change management and you want to build the confidence of the stakeholders, observability is really important. You mentioned the metrics, and people need to know why, right? Who changed it? Why? When? And those kind of event-driven, very observable architectures really the flip side of the composability for sure.
I feel like we could do an entire webinar on observability and the different kinds of observability. The guy from Iora Health, and Rick, forgive me, I'm forgetting his name, Dr.
Andrew Schutzbank.
Schutzbank, thank you. He has a 3-part series on his blog, 3 or 4-part series on his blog. I'm going to be plugging his blog now on metrics and measuring. And so maybe we can put that in the chat as well. But this is something I think we could spend a lot of time talking about as well, the importance of it.
Love it. I think it's really useful.
I think so too. And I think talking about metrics is also crucial. And so maybe a question to you, Fel, first, and then Reshma, I will go to you after that. So were there certain metrics, Fel, that Tia tracked to inform, okay, we really need to redesign our tech stack now? Or was it more the contract is ending and we have now the possibility to switch to something better? Or how are you looking at that?
Yeah, I actually would say it was a pretty crude metric, which was just the uptime of Chrono, which was really hampering our operations. We were seeing pretty significant service interruptions. And this would, obviously, if, again, speaking to just these kind of large behemoths that are servicing a bunch of different, services in your organization, if it goes down, you basically lose everything. So we were seeing, full on days where our clinicians were having to do all of their documentation in a notes app because our entire system was down. So it wasn't super complex at that level. It's kind of rudimentary in the sense of like, how many days can you afford to have your entire EHR out? None. So if you get 15 in a year, then that's kind of absurd. So it was just really that. And I think the push on that side, plus also seeing what was happening in the ecosystem, it became kind of a no-brainer in the sense that, again, when we started, a lot of these different services didn't exist. And so it was both needing to deliver a better service for our providers, but also seeing how there are a lot more opportunities for us that had been developed that weren't there when we started, that gave us the extra nudge to start experimenting into different architectures.
And then, so Reshma, when organizations like TIA, for example, decide, okay, we want to migrate some of our key components into Medplum, is there like a general set of KPIs that they track, or is each organization different in like, okay, for us, Medplum implementation is successful if you reach ABC? So how are your customers looking at that?
So we have a really detailed migration guide on our website because in our documentation, because this is like a FAQ. What, the hard replatform is not a thing. You need to like progressively upgrade and get your workflows like working exactly the way you want. That's part of what we do. And Medplum is very data driven. Like in our API, there's identities like practitioners and providers, patients. And then there's the clinical data, the notes, the observations, all that stuff. And like, we're basically watching, are the identities being created? Are they authenticating? Or that type of thing. Are there slow queries? Are people creating, there's kind of workflow objects like tasks or encounters. Are people creating those? Like that's kind of what we're looking at. And we have very sophisticated OTel-based instrumentation. If any OTel nerds in there, like we have kind of those, you can think of them like CloudWatch or you're just looking at the little ticker, and we have that too. And that's part of what we're looking at. We're kind of at the infrastructure or platform level. So there's also site reliability, response times, uptime. Those are key for us too. So this isn't unique to Medplum in the sense that platform engineering often has this shape, but we focus on from a clinical perspective is migration of those key data types and making sure folks move through that in a reasonable manner to help them get their business goals.
And so part of Medplum is also obviously, the FHIR aspect of what you're building. So maybe first, before letting you talk, Reshma, did that also impacted your decision to pick Medplum, or was it more nice to have? And how are you looking at using FHIR like when building the further foundations of your tech stack as well?
Yeah, it absolutely was a key consideration. We had converted all of our data structures into FHIR about a year prior to making the decision. Part of that was driven by the fact that we do partner with health systems and go through a process of integrating with them, share patient data, and a variety of other types of data back and forth. And so obviously, that's a baseline requirement for how we're just storing and structuring our data at this point. And so it actually was like, oh, this is going to be even easier because we already did all this hard work the year prior, and then was kind of a no-brainer at the level of, okay, this is definitely the way forward for us.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's, the audience members might have different backgrounds, but to be a certified EHR in America, you have to support the FHIR G10 interface, which is like a specific implementation guide of FHIR. And it's really useful across the board for interop queries, and it has a lot of downstream benefits that will make you future-proof in the future. For example, the clinical quality measures are derivatives of FHIR, for example.
Yeah, I was going to say the FHIR has been becoming more and more popular, and I'll just say at Awell, this is something we're not FHIR native like Medplum is, but we've jumped on the FHIR bandwagon, and there's real value in having that standardized data available, right? And so supporting something like that again makes it easier for systems to connect to one another, and I think there's real value there.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons why I like FHIR is also the fact that every data flow essentially should trigger care flows, because what we have done maybe 10 years ago when you bought a population health dashboard or a tooling that will help you identify patients, what you essentially got was a list of people that you need to reach out to, or a list of patients that needed your attention. But then it was a clinician that manually needed to follow up on the care flow. So they manually needed to reach out. They manually needed to switch between 7 different tabs to figure out what the F they need to do for this patient. And because we now are working towards a more standardized data model, what we can also do as an organization, or that our customers allow us to do, is using standardized data to then automatically trigger workflows based on that data flow coming in. And I think that's also the entire ethos behind Medplum as well, is once you have that data standardized, you can also again have that composability to then build more standardized complex tooling that can help you paint a picture on the patient journey as well. I think, but Reshma, feel free to, or Jonathan, feel free to tap in.
I was just going to say I was going to add one thing, which is it also becomes much easier to pull the data out rather than have to learn another API. You know how to, if you know how to build FHIR queries, that's already there for you for the most part, or change it a little. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would never say that FHIR is perfect, but it is like, it's thought of a lot of things that you don't have to like relearn. For example, if you have HbA1c of X, but you're pregnant, it has like a different interpretation, but all those observations have the way to represent that. So which I have made personally the wrong data model for that in the past. So I think it's got a very, a lot of utility that, you stand on the shoulders of giants. From Medplum's perspective, FHIR, we have a FHIR data store. It's a core part of the application, but we understand that people can't always do like interop in FHIR. There's custom REST and binary files and all that stuff, and CDA and HL7. And we have like an interfacing engine to help smooth the transition and to like make a lower lift for those custom adapters and interop that you will inevitably need.
Yep, that makes a lot of sense. And then something else that I wanted to briefly discuss, Fel, you mentioned that when you started TIA, you didn't have the Medplum, you didn't have the Awell on the market, and today you do. But whenever I talk to health or care organizations that sometimes raise a lot of money, you still have a lot of product leaders that have a very, very strong build mindset. And they say, like, I don't care if these tools exist, I will still continue to build everything and write every line of code myself. And I know that TIA also has been transforming from a very build-oriented mindset to more like a build and buy approach. So what prompted this change, and yeah, can you maybe briefly elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think it just comes back to kind of basic I don't even know, Keynesian economics, do what you can, specialize where you can, and be excellent at it. And for us, I think it's taking a step back and maybe, again, kind of alluding to those war room wounds that I said we have many of in the beginning. I think as you get deeper and deeper into delivering care, you realize how complex the system is, and you need help. You can't build every component of this complex system. What's amazing is that we have people out there today who are building very kind of specific solutions for these needs, and they're building really excellent ones. And so it's kind of like, why am I deploying my very limited resources towards rebuilding something that somebody has already built and they've done it excellently? Why not just really think about what I can do that's differentiated for my key users, my patients and my providers? And so I think that's where it really comes down to thinking about how can we stand on top of the shoulders of others, use what Reshma just said, is like, I think there's a lot of that in healthcare that we need to really be considering. And that's, if we think about that as architects of the systems in healthcare and say, okay, how are we deploying these dollars that are getting, that are coming into us as, unique companies or broadly into the system in the most efficient way? It's your job as a steward of that capital to think about that. And I think in that lens, it's the most kind of effective way to say, how can I partner, not how can I rebuild something that's already been built and probably do a worse job at it. And so I think that's what's really come up for us. And again, when we first started, these solutions didn't exist out there. We were, I don't want to say unique, because I think a lot of other people had the same insights, but we definitely felt like we were on an island in the way that we were approaching building the system for our providers. And then over the last several years, you've seen this approach and the kind of philosophy become much more prevalent across many others. And with that kind of trend, we've been able to start to unstack a lot of our infrastructure. And so I think that's really why and how we've approached it.
And the way that you structured your organization, has it also changed because you adopted like more of this composable architecture? Like, have you hired less engineers? Yeah. Do you have more PMs, for example, or how is that changing?
One of the biggest shifts that we've done is really how we've organized our Scrum teams is different. We used to focus Scrum teams on specific services, and now we're actually able to organize them more laterally across like end-to-end workflows, which is much healthier for building an excellent workflow. And so I think that's been something that has actually driven, again, a lot more experimentation for our care delivery team. And in enabling a kind of change or shift in the ways that people are thinking about not do a task, but how do you support a patient across the journey? And that's been much, I think we're actually seeing like business outcomes at that level in terms of healthier, like better clinical quality, better retention with our patients. And so that's been really interesting to kind of just see how a shift in Scrum team organization can yield that level of result.
And so a question to the two engineers in this call. So we all know that clinicians are not the only ones with big egos. Engineers also have big egos. And so whenever I talk, for example, I was talking to an engineering leader last week, and I was trying to convince him that he should buy and build together, but he was very hard to convince because he said, like, look at the amount of code that I'm shipping. I can now use cloud, and I'm even writing code even faster. So I as a clinician, I don't care who's writing the code. I care about a good provider experience, and I care about good patient care. So let's say that I'm now a clinician and I need to convince my engineering leader tomorrow, like, you need to look at Awell, you need to look at Medplum, and you need to build towards that composability. Reshma, what advice would you give me? And then Jonathan, I will ask the same question to you.
I mean, I think that an engineering leader, been in engineering for a long time, and there's fun parts and there's really not fun parts. Do you really want to certify a full EHR, load in the code systems, do all that maintenance, do the dependency upgrades? Probably not. And those things take a lot of effort. Even just maintaining the certs and all the compliance and stuff is a big deal, as well as like things like site reliability and keeping and hiring engineers to stay awake in the middle of the night. You probably don't want that. And I think that is what we provide our customers. You don't want to rewrite the special kind of OAuth 2 that healthcare requires. Like, what you really want as an engineering leader, and what will really help you move fast, is that kind of attachment to the domain, that specific care model. That's what really requires your time and energy. Focus on that. Even that in itself is a huge problem, and that was what I would say to the engineering leaders. I mean, I do talk to a lot of teams who struggle with having like a clinical and engineering culture and having to deal with the culture clash, and really being thoughtful about that is a important ongoing conversation. Certainly a bright line to think about is how much true maintenance is really important to you, and that might be a starting point.
Yeah. I'll tag on to that. I was immediately going to jump into culture, and I'm gonna follow up my response with a question to you, Fel. But to me, this is a culture thing, and you need to have buy-in from leadership in order to create a culture where it's safe to not have to not know everything, and to lean into your partners who want to see you succeed for their expertise. So I think it's a culture thing. And if you're not in a leadership position, then there are opportunities to create small teams that have that culture of safety, where it's okay to not know, and it's okay to lean on others. So for me, I think it really is first and foremost a mindset and culture thing.
I also think from the Awell side, what we often see is that engineers think that they can build a workflow because the clinician explains the workflow. Like, we have this 2-step workflow. Can you build it? But then you build it, and then on Friday you say, "Hey, clinician, I've built it." But then on Monday the clinician says, "Hey, but I forgot this part, and I also forgot this part." And also we are expanding to this state, and we have this different logic that you also need to incorporate next month. So can you also? And so that's obviously a clusterfuck of a lot of things that you as an engineer don't want to care about. And so our entire ethos on the Awell side is you should care about the content in the workflow, but the tool that is used to orchestrate that workflow essentially should be in the hands of the persons and the people that are the closest to the care delivery, because otherwise you have that translation error that happens between clinicians and engineers, because we obviously we speak both or different languages as well. And so a question, and this is maybe one for you, Fel, because you know both Medplum and you also know Awell, and someone in the audience asked, like, isn't Medplum UI stack and what Awell is offering, is it like a lot of overlap between both tools, or like what would be some scenarios that justify to both buy Awell and Medplum? And maybe you have some thoughts on that, and then Reshma and Jonathan, you can tap in as well.
I would say that it's much more of kind of like a product where one goes with the other. I'm trying to think of a good analogy. It's almost like you want to buy a cooler and then put beers in it. Like, you're just making the thing a party now. The idea being that, what Medplum supports is an infrastructure, and then what Awell supports is allowing tasking on top of that infrastructure that really supercharges your workflows. And so they're two really different, I don't know if I would call them use cases, but they're two really different services that work very well together to ultimately get you where you want to be. But I actually think they're they're very different in the sense of what they're doing, and how to actually think about utilizing them is very different as well.
I mean, to echo that, like the things that Medplum focuses on, we are not focused on our UI. You know, the UI we have is an enabler to help the infrastructure be more successful, but it's not strategic for us. It's like an on-ramp for folks to build their own experiences. And in that way, you know, Awell very complementary. No clinician is gonna be really building workflows on Medplum via API. They won't do it, right? That's not what they're trained for and what they want to do. And so if it has a UI for ours, like we just have the starter edition. Really, it's a on-ramp.
Yeah, I think again, before Jonathan giving you the final word, probably is, for me as a clinician, I really care about the clinicians and the ops people designing workflows without creating an engineering bottleneck, because the IT backlog is probably even bigger than a surgeon's ego. So that's very, very big. And you don't want to have an extra tickets where you have like, hey, engineer, can you tweak this if this and that logic? Or hey, engineer, can you add this additional question? So just give the people closest to the care process and delivery the power to modify and design the care flows. But then you click on publish, but then give the engineers the ability, so the APIs, to orchestrate that inside Medplum. That is essentially the CRM/EHR where your providers are working in. So that's how I really look at that. But maybe Jonathan, you have some final thoughts before closing off here.
No, you touched on all the important points. So I'm great here. Yeah.
All right, we are just in time. Before closing off, Fel, where can people reach you if they have more questions?
Oh, happy to share my email address in the chat if anyone wants to chat more with me.
Awesome. And can the audience be helpful to you in any way? Something that we need to share, or I don't know, something, maybe some promotion for Tia as well, because I assume that you are always looking for patients.
Yeah, if you know a woman in need of great healthcare in New York, San Francisco, LA, or Phoenix, please feel free to send them our way.
Awesome. And obviously, thank you for joining us. Reshma, some final words on your end. I also see some more questions about people wanting to reach you, people asking if you're available in Europe. So I think you have a lot to discuss with some people in the audience.
Oh, yes. Happy to discuss Europe at another time. But we do have BDSR, and I'm familiar with all those things. Anyway, I'm Reshma at medplum.com. Please feel free to reach out. We have a very community vibe at Medplum. We have a Discord in the footer of our website, and we have an open source repo and community. So we really want to hear from everyone. If you're a healthcare dev, please join us, and great to meet everyone here.
Jonathan, final word is for you.
That's great. I love that you have a Discord. It's like nothing says open source like having a Discord. That's it's great. Yep, Jonathan at awellhealth.com. I'll put my email address in there as well. I'm also Health Tech Nerds. Glad to have a chat. I think we're all there. So that's another great place to connect.
Thank you. Thank you all for joining, and thank you, Reshma, Fel, and Jonathan, for being in the panel. And see you next time.
Thanks so much, Rick, for organizing.
Thanks
for having us.
Bye-bye.